XL bullies is a different breed, trust me.
But why do you breed them?
Because I absolutely love dogs. I love dogs. I'm passionate about dogs. Absolutely.
Well, breed Jack Russells then.
Jack Russells. I've had 3 Jack Russells. I remember growing up. Little Bobby Harrison, we called him. Loved him to bits, but any type of dog, however, XL bullies. I'm sorry, Ian. Let's not beat around the bush. The people who own these dogs, the very vast majority, not all, I'll be honest, not all, but a lot of them, they walk around, not with leads, selling
it's got
things.
nothing. No, I'm sorry, this has got nothing to do. This may have a little bit to do with Leeds, but that's not the whole story. I'm going to ask you a question now. When you decided to breed this type of dog, who were you aiming them at? Who did you want to sell them to, and who did you sell them to?
Drug dealers. I'll be absolutely honest, Ian.
You sold them to drug dealers?
I did.
Well,
you know what, Ian?
I'm tempted to end the call now.
No, I've always said this. Why do you need a licence for a dog and not for a cat? Because cats can't
Sorry,
drive.
you've just admitted that you bred them to sell them to drug dealers. What kind of person does that make you?
Ian, who's going to put bread on the table for my family? I've got 6 kids.
Oh, go to hell, David.
It is pretty sick-making, the relish with which politicians enjoy looking, describing and rubbing our nose in how bad they say it's all going. I don't think any Brexiteer with 2 brain cells to rub together thinks genuinely that we're in a rosy, sunlit uplands, whatever it is.
Constructive change
And
as to where you would take
hang on a
Brexit.
minute,
That's
Tobias.
the question.
Hang on a
That is
minute,
the
Tobias.
question.
I haven't been in Westminster making the calls. I tell you, if I had, there'd be a lot of
You
things
just
that
said
were
you're a
different.
Brexiteer.
Yeah, but
We're
I
all
don't have any.
Brexiteers. We all are
Part of
living with Brexit.
Hang on.
I'm saying this model of Brexit is not working.
Hang
So
on.
tell us, how do we change?
Let us speak.
I know. I'm used to Remainer shouting at me, and don't worry about
I'm not a Remainer.
But
I'm a post-Brexiteer. We're all post-Brexiteers. The fact that you label
Tobias,
people...
let her speak, please.
But, the thing is, as I was saying, I don't think anyone thinks we're living in a one that I've just described how bad the cost of living crisis is. No one thinks that things are going well. The point is, I'm not sat in the House of Commons making policy or making law. Part of the Brexit vote, the excitement of it was giving more democracy to ordinary people, to your average Joe and Jane. And unfortunately, what this government has done, and with no help from the opposition coming from the sidelines, is make a complete hames of it, has make a total mess of any kind of potential that we could have had.
That was all...
By spending, hang on a minute, I know you can laugh.
But it was always going to be the Brexiteers' argument when it didn't work. Well, it could have worked if you'd done it properly.
that. So what would you do differently?
The scorn in this room is unbelievable.
No,
and actually, to be serious for a second.
I'm curious.
To be serious for a
You're
second.
not very curious because you won't let us speak.
The things that could have been differently is that you could have had politicians take seriously the exciting prospect of voting citizens wanting to be more involved in politics, looking at big things like sovereignty, big things like democracy, talking about how we could change British politics for the better. That take back control slogan might have been slandered as some kind of ridiculous Nigel Farage side of the bus, whatever it is. And you can go down that route if you want. Or actually, if you cared about, as you seem to opine like you do, about the average, person who, you say, oh, it's so bad, they're going to food banks, oh, it's so terrible, everyone's a hard time. If you actually cared about their political prospects and the future of their political lives, you would have taken seriously the challenge that Brexit set the British political class. Unfortunately, it has been squandered, and I'm miserable about that. But what I will not accept is that it's somehow our fault, that it's the fault of voters in Bolton or in Tottenham or all the places where there's...
Sorry, nobody has said that.
For you to sit here, hang on a minute.
Nobody has said that. You are putting words into people's mouths and then saying that they're our views and they are not. This is ridiculous.
For you to sit here and scoff and say...
I'm not scoffing. I want to know what you do better. I'm still asking this, but Ian's going to tell me to shut up again. I want to know what will change.
Anyway, let's move on.
What will change?
I'm going to
tell you all to shut up because we have to go to the news.
Your mum might be a bit ashamed of you, really, if she were here to...
Oh, dear.
Yes,
Why?
well, I think so. We're not a tolerant, we might think we're a tolerant society. I would say that we're a debased society. We've lost all sense of right and wrong and morality. The yardstick I would use, there are many, but the main one I would say to you this evening would be 200,000 plus abortions every year. Abortion is a euphemism. It actually means the killing or the ending of a life, surgically or chemically, of a young baby in the womb. It's not a subjective fact of religious people. It's an objective biological fact. And it's supported in this country by the government, by MPs, by the judiciary, by the medical profession, and worst of all, by the Royal College of Midwives. It's an absolute disgrace. We live in a society...
So you'd like to go back to the days of backstreet abortions, would you?
Moral to the point of wickedness. We're taking, since 1967, 10 million lives of young babies in the womb.
Jim, this is not... Jim,
you and me.
Jim.
Yes.
This is not an abortion phone-in. It's about morality in general. But you clearly would like to go back to pre-1967 when when backstreet abortions were rife and many women died because of them. You'd like to return to those days, would you?
Certainly not. I don't agree with backstreet abortions. And David Steele, if you read the research, Ian, which you ought to do, you'll find that he lied in Parliament to use that argument to force that bill through.
Isn't it funny how in the ensuing 60 years?
I'm not saying just about abortion. I could go on about homosexuality, divorce, all the other things that you're mentioning. But
by the way,
I wouldn't have time to do that.
No.
By the way, Peter Hitchens has referred to them.
By the way,
why, society, Ian, make no mistake
honestly, this is not a monologue.
Whether you want to call it sin or not, we have lost the sense of right and wrong. If you take life, if you don't cherish life, sort of a society have you got? If you can't value human life...
God. You said at the beginning of this phone call that my mother would be ashamed of me, which I think is actually a bloody cheek of you, but why do you think that?
Well, because you said that your mother herself, when she was bringing you up and teaching you her values, I think probably her Christian values, that she wouldn't have liked to know that lots of people were having abortions or divorces or becoming homosexual or, whatever else it might be. Your mum probably would have been very upset by it, but you're proclaiming it now. You're actually saying that you don't feel a sense of shame about it. You've just said it on your programme.
I've never been divorced, so I've no reason to feel a sense of shame about being divorced. I've never had an abortion. The other two things, possibly, I am guilty of.
Well, if you think about it, people are taxed heavily if they smoke and if they drink, and that's fair enough. Well, I think if people want to take the life of their own baby, if they want to contracept, bearing in mind contraceptives, with the exception of the condom, are all abortifacients, they should be taxed on it. Why should the taxpayer have to pay for someone to go to an abortion centre and have their baby either destroyed chemically or at the surgeon's knife?
Do you think that gay people should live forever with a sense of shame then because they're gay?
No, I don't think. I think people, if people are homosexual and that's the lifestyle they want to have, I think they should just get on with it like everyone else. Like we're heterosexuals, we just get on with our lives. I don't think it's certainly wrong for homosexual people to be in any way, what shall I say, bullied or in any way, incriminated. But if that's the life that they want to have, yes, carry on with it. But they shouldn't be in a position, which has happened now, where they're dominating the rest of society. Homosexual gay values, if you like, are imposed across the board at government level, sport, in schools. I mean, children are being taught and confused about all these genders that they might be. It's actually an abuse of children.
So basically, gay people shouldn't be radio presenters, should they, because they might influence people to be gay?
No, gay people can be in any job. They can be in any job.
Thank you.
And that's part of the course. But at the same time, I don't think the homosexual ideology should prevail to the level.
Sorry, what is the homosexual? Oh my God, I'm going to have to go there, ladies and gentlemen. What is the homosexual ideology?
It is to say that in schools children are to be taught that being homosexual is the same, is an equivalent of being heterosexual, and that homosexual marriage is the same as heterosexual marriage. It isn't.
Well, the law says it is.
It isn't. Doesn't matter what the law says. Two men can't have... Elton John and his partner can't have a baby together. They have to pay
they have had one.
thousands of pounds to a surrogate mother, and then they don't put her name on the child's certificate.
But that would have been Jim. Stop. That would have been illegal 30 years ago because gay people weren't allowed to adopt children or have children through IVF, and they are now. Presumably, you don't think that's a good thing?
I don't. I disagree with homosexual people. If you can't have a child naturally, I don't think... I don't want to go... you probably don't want me to go in describing the various actions that homosexual people are having or do have.
Oh, I know them all, Jim. I don't need you to tell me about them, but thank you very much indeed.
They can't conceive a child between the two of them.
This is true.
The idea that these are, in any real way, low-paid jobs, especially over the course of one's lifetime, it's ridiculous. But
compared to other countries, they are. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? Staff retention.
Yes, compared to other countries, and I would love to adopt some of those countries' healthcare systems, right? You want to start talking to me about the German system, the Australian system, the Netherlands, you want to even talk about France? We can talk about why in those systems doctors get paid more money, but you cannot, on one hand, refuse to talk about reform, as Philip has mentioned, always say that that's a backdoor to privatization, which it is not. You cannot call yourself a public servant and say, I'm working for the state in this monopoly on healthcare that we think is a public good, and then on the other hand, demand the kinds of salaries that you get from more free market healthcare. You can't have both.
Ollie Dugmore, are junior doctors' pay demands fair? That's what Cara wants to know.
Yes.
So how would you pay for it?
Is that all you have to say?
Would you like, we can get into it. How would I pay for it?
Yeah, how would you pay for it? Where are you finding that money?
Taxes. Tax the rich, tax them until the pips squeak.
So genuinely, what taxes are you raising?
Hang on,
who am I arguing with?
Let Ollie set out his stall.
There is money in our political system. Where it gets spent is a political choice. Let's talk about the £4 billion in unusable PPE, a lot of which that money went to Conservative Party cronies, peers, donors. It is an ethical choice how we spend money in government. And I would challenge people in this country that if they want to go out and they want to clap for the NHS during a pandemic when we were literally sending them into hospitals to confront a disease that we didn't know anything about, sometimes wearing bin liners, those people deserve fair pay. They're not actually asking for an extraordinary pay rise. They're asking for the restoration of what they were paid in 2008. That's not an unreasonable demand.
So do you think part of the solution might be for the government to come forward and say, OK, we get that you've lost this money since 2010. We accept that. We accept that part of your argument. We can't give you 35% now. You don't expect it. There's no way that we can do that. But over the next 3, 4, 5 years, we will do it. And here's the proposal.
Yeah.
Now that, to me, would be the logical way forward.
It's called negotiation.
No, but Iain, I'm sorry. Everybody has lost out. Everyone. It's not just doctors. It's not just nurses. Everybody has lost out. And you can't point to a one-off COVID spend, as irresponsible as some of that spending was. I agree with you. You can't point to a one-off spend and claim that that's how you would fund a perpetual commitment, which again isn't just salary, but is a massive pension on top of that as well, and say that's how I'd fund it. So seriously, you've both said you would 35% is reasonable. How would you fund it?
There's often no cucumbers, there's no tomatoes, sometimes there's no bread, and we see people posting pictures, I'm one of them, on Twitter, showing the fact there's just no fresh produce available. What are you doing about that?
What time do you go to the supermarket?
Down the road? I have. I once went to 5 supermarkets to find tomatoes and cucumbers. Nothing.
Oh,
what are you doing about that?
Heinz baked beans, Heinz baked beans. Say the price has shot up at that, and people say, this tin has gone up by 50% or whatever. Buy the Tesco-value one.
No, but
they don't taste the same.
But if they don't
you can't have baked beans that aren't Heinz.
But I just want to point out that Brexit has helped none of this. It hasn't helped the farmers, hasn't helped the prices in the supermarket.
But I don't think it's hindered as much as, shall we say, some people say it has.
I think it has, and also we need to point out the fact that a lot of the time farmers, it's actually cheaper for them because they can't get the people to help out, pick the crops, to plough what they've got back into the ground. It's cheaper to do that than to harvest it.
I've got a quote here from a pretty prominent economist, and they say that Labour needs to provide an alternative to aggressive policies being prioritised by the Conservative. The banks and those earning more than £100,000 could quite easily contribute a little more, and unless they do, inequality and poverty will inevitably soar in the months and years ahead. Do you agree with that statement?
The way that I believe that you can reduce inequality, reduce poverty, and actually also improve the living standards of ordinary working people, not in poverty, but struggling to get by, is through growing the economy. Because that is the way that we can ensure that working people have more money in their pockets and we have more money for public services. And one of the real failures over these last 13 years is to grow our economy in all parts of the country, creating those good quality, high-paid jobs. So my priority is to get that economic growth back in our economy, to lift people out of poverty and to have the money we need to invest in our schools and our hospitals and so much else of the public realm, which has been, decimated, frankly, by this Conservative government.
Well, let's bring in another caller who's got a similar point to make. Phil in Broadstairs. Hello, Phil.
Good evening, Ian. Hello, Rachel. Yes,
hi, Phil.
In sort of answer to that last call, or adding to it, you said you came into politics to change things, and yet all I've heard from you and the front bench is Tory policies for a Tory crisis. You're not going to tax wealth. You're not going to do much with income tax. You're leaving the profits of the banks, the water and the energy untouched. I remember very well, because I was born in that period, the Attlee government. And what they came in with was a four-letter word, hope. You aren't communicating hope. There is no ambition in evidence in what you're doing. And they had a much harder job than you've got to rebuild the country after the Second World War. COVID is bad. 2008 was terrible. But austerity has to be stopped. And you seem to be wanting to carry on worshipping the Treasury, because you are an ex-banker, Bank of England banker, and you don't seem to be in making any kind of ambition clear to me as a voter, or the public as voters, whether you're prepared to rise to these challenges, which are far worse than what we had in World War II.
So what's your actual question?
Well, the question is, why are you employing Tory policies to deal with a Tory crisis?
Well, I mean, just going back to Helena's question, the economist that she quoted, that was actually you.
Well, look, I mean, I want to reduce poverty and inequality. I didn't go into politics, but how do you do that? What are the practical things that we can do?
Well, your suggestion in that quote was to tax the banks more and those earning more than £100,000 more, but you've gone back on that.
Well, look, the way that I think that we can lift people out of poverty and reduce inequality, as I say, is to get the economy growing, and that has been the missing ingredient these last 13 years. Now, Phil sort of says, oh, I'm an ex-banker. Yes, I am an ex-Bank of England economist, and the one thing I learnt more than anything at the Bank of England is your sums have always got to add up. And what we saw less than a year ago was a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who decided to throw that very simple truth that your sums have got to add up out of the window. And where does that leave us?
First anniversary of Liz Truss today.
First anniversary today. And the damage that was done in those 44 or whatever it is, short days, is immense.
How can you be so naive to think that this man is going to ponce around in a carriage or whatever he's going to be in when only 20 minutes from the palace is people starving on Wharf Road? He came there last year, he left him within about 15 minutes because he couldn't stand it, and he ran off. And do you know what I mean? To tell you how many food banks are in Southwark alone? I mean, do you think it warrants £57 million or probably more for us to pay that when we're starving and there's kids with no clothes? I'm telling you, it's an insult. I mean, it's a hobby for you, and I understand that when you're probably sitting at home with a gin and Dubonnet, that's fine. But people are starving 20 minutes from where he's meant to be. There were families that went to war for this area. They was in the undergrounds in Kennington. They built back this area. It's all families, South East London families worked hard to build back this area, and he's left them to starve and wants to walk 20 minutes down the road with a big crown. Oh, and it weighs how much? Oh, what a pity. How sad is that? It is an insult to us.
You purport to speak for a huge number of people, but I would suspect a lot of the people that you think you're speaking on behalf of are actually devout monarchists.
let me tell you one thing. This generation that's coming up, if you need to come into the real world, get on the internet. Everyone is
I don't need to get on the internet. I talk to people every day on this programme.
Go on Instagram. Look on the Shade Borough. Look at the black youth. No, you need to know.
I'll talk to real people on my show, thank you, Cheryl.
Let's tell you about real people.
I think
the real people are on the show. No, let me say one thing. I haven't finished yet. Okay. The real people, right? Let me say one thing. Go on the real internet. Go on the Shade Borough for the black youths growing up in Southwark. Go and see what their opinion is. No one cares about them. We're the real people, you know.
Well, I would say...
Okay, all right, Cheryl, you've had a good say. Let Sally respond.
I would maintain that he has been actively involved in promoting employment, training, engaging with young people. After the Brixton riots, he got together a whole organization called Business in the Community, which started working with communities to try and improve housing, healthcare, a whole range of things. It was sort of similar to what his grandfather had done back in the 1920s. And the Prince's Trust has now helped over 1 million young people by giving them a start in life. And he is acutely aware of the disparities of wealth in this country. And he's devoted himself with myriad projects.
For stabilising the economy. We did have the fastest growth in the G7 in 2021 and 2022.
We've got the lowest now.
No, but we will recover. All the hallmarks, all the fundamentals are there in place. We've got low unemployment. We've got inflation coming down. We've got a competent government.
Inflation went up last month.
Yes, but it's forecast by the OBR to be 2.9% in the fourth quarter of this year.
Do you seriously believe that's going to happen?
I do, provided, of course, we don't give in to pay settlements where people are demanding 35% pay increases. Of course, that would blow inflation apart. But the point about we were discussing the Labour Party, I just think if the Labour Party lose the election, they've got to look at how they manage economies, because their history, throughout the history of the Labour Party, is the damage they do to the British economy.
Under the Blair government, the economy was well managed. I mean, then the financial crash came. I mean, we can argue about sort of things that we might have done differently, but it generally was well managed. The financial crash came along. Gordon Brown was seen by everybody outside this country as almost the saviour of the world economy. It doesn't really fit into your narrative.
Because, there was the banking crash, of course, but also the way they had spent during that period meant that when we came into office in 2010, we had a budget deficit, an annual budget deficit of £156 billion
What is it now?
It's
a lot more.
We have been through the COVID crisis and we're trying to deal with that. But that was 11% of GDP that we were spending each year. We had to bring that down. And because of that, we were able to borrow during the COVID crisis.
Okay. Right, let's repeat the question. If the Starmer project fails and he doesn't win the general election, what next for Labour, Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, before I say that, Nick, I wonder which planet you're on at the moment, mate. I really do. Inflation, well over 12%. Food inflation, much more. More food banks in this country than branches.
Jeremy, you're taking your pen.
Sorry,
to the microphone.
It's a very good pen, given to me by a trade union. You're suggesting that somehow the economy is doing well. Well, if you ask anyone who is worse off than they were 10 years ago, ask anyone like a teacher or a rail worker, a mail worker, what's happened to their wages, they won't be very, very happy. And you cannot say that wages have caused this inflation, because wages have actually fallen over the last 10 years. And if you actually got round the table with all the unions involved in the current disputes and paid them properly, you would actually have more money being spent in the economy, which would help investment anyway, and you would have a lot less poverty around and a lot less people claiming universal credit or top-ups in order to get through. Now, for the Labour Party, I think the important thing is to offer a real alternative. And I saw an analysis in the iPaper last week which said one of the problems was many of the public don't fully understand what Labour's economic strategy is, because they're so busy presenting themselves as being very good at managing the economy. Surely we've got to look at the structural problems. The structural problems are historic lack of investment. Structural problems are historic lack of training, historic problems of underpayment of teachers and medical workers, many of whom, if they can, emigrate or they go and do something else, even though they've been trained at public expense.
You put forward that case in 2019.
I put forward that case in 2019. Yep. Of course we lost the election. I fully understand that, but there are many reasons, one of which was issues around Brexit, I'm sure you'd understand. But individually, interestingly, the policies, particularly ones on public ownership of mail, rail, water and energy, were actually all publicly supported and still are. I think what we need is a much clearer alternative in the election.
My personal opinion is that the way Israel are treating the people in Gaza is like a ghetto. They've cooped them up there. 2 million people in a tiny space of land, about 20 by 10 kilometres. Right. Now, everyone's trying to say that the Gaza civilians are not behind the Hamas, but I don't blame them if they are, and I do think they are, because this is how they're being locked up then there. It is unacceptable, and no one is voicing their opinion, and even their Arab nations are joining up with Israel, and they don't realise what Israel is doing to them.
Well, they clearly do.
The only way to voice their opinion.
They clearly do understand the situation in Israel. They see Hamas as a malignant cancer on the Palestinian movement, which they are. They know that it's actually, at least in part, Hamas who is responsible for the fact that the peace talks have not progressed over the last years, because there have been chances to get a two-state solution, and yet it is largely the extremists who've sort of made sure that that doesn't happen. So that Israel actually left Gaza in 2005 and left it to be self-governed, and it's been a terrible failure by the Palestinians to actually achieve effective self-government.
Right, well, how do you want them to make an effective government with, everything being limited and watched by Israel, which comes into the country, right, which comes into their tiny little space, right? And they've got no space for the people. Israel aren't giving them, enough to deal for 2 million people, and Israel is only about 8, and it's, who knows how much bigger it is, even though it's so small.
So all you've done in this phone call is talk about the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza, and I'm not going to disagree that the living conditions there have been appalling for a very long time. I completely agree with that. But
right,
you
what
think
do you want Hamas to do if this is the only way to voice their opinion?
Well, so you think this is the way they should have voiced their opinion, do you?
Right, well, there's no other way to voice it, right?
Isn't it funny how Fatah in the West Bank, they don't do this sort of thing. They have regular back-channel conversations with the Israeli government, and there are relations.
How many people are there in the West Bank?
If you're going to keep talking when I'm talking because you don't like what I'm saying, I'll end the call right now.
Go ahead.
Would you like to condemn what Hamas did?
Sorry?
Would you like to condemn what Hamas did, killing hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli citizens, beheading babies?
Well, this is the only way for them to voice their opinion.
Oh, OK, go away, Mo. I don't want anybody like you on my programme. You disgust me with that kind of attitude. There is no excuse. You cannot equate a democratic state like Israel with a terrorist grouping. You simply cannot.
In my view, it's a pathetic excuse. I mean, 13 years.
Well, it might be it might be an entirely legitimate.
No,
in fairness, it might be an entirely legitimate excuse. The
13 years.
There comes a point politically where it doesn't matter anymore.
But Charlotte, you don't remember the 1980s because you're too young. The winter of discontent was quoted by the Tories. Bear in mind that was 78, 79. That was quoted by Greg's predecessors like Norman Tebbit would come out with that back in 1988, 1989, 1990. So this is not a new thing.
But if I might, what we're talking about is what's happening today. Actually, Labour have been in charge of Birmingham for 10 years. Labour have been in charge of London for the last 7 years. Labour have been in charge of Wales for the last 25 years.
So you've been in charge of the country for 30 years.
Okay, but what I'm talking about is...
And people are saying...
The point here is where Labour are in charge of something.
But Greg, the point is, and people are saying, look, if you're basically saying now, we've been in charge in 13 years, but we can't deal with these issues because Labour's messing it up.
No, I'm not saying.
They're thinking, well, what's the
But
point?
that is the point.
What's the
Dan,
point?
that is
why we vote?
When Labour are in charge, they don't run things well. I'm making a very simple, straightforward
And you know what else this day is? It's a year since Liz Lettuce Truss, who, as a result of her cavalier policies, have put hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on people's mortgage bills. I mean, I'm sorry, we are now at the point where it used to be the case, perhaps, once upon a time, when people might look at the Conservative Party and think, OK, you know, I don't like everything they do, but you can probably trust them with money. I genuinely don't think that the Conservatives, after the debacle of the last year and how people are feeling and what they are having to do to make ends meet, that people can credibly look at the Conservative Party and say that anymore. So I'm sorry, you know, but I think Dan's completely right. They've got nothing left, that they've got to hark back to 13 years ago.
I disagree. That is also out of date. I mean, what we have seen, particularly with the economic data being revised...
Are you saying that people's mortgages haven't gone up?
The economic data being revised is actually the UK is the best performing G7 country in
You're
Europe.
so out of touch, Greg.
That's
I'm
last
sorry, I've got
week's
to challenge
economic
you.
data.
You are
That is
so out of touch.
You're a year out of date. I'm talking last week's economic revised data.
And I'm talking about the doors I knocked on last week.
Britain is actually the best recovering major economy in Europe.
Greg, you are so out of it.
You try telling that to somebody who rings into this show day after day saying, well, OK, we may be the fastest growing economy. That's the macro side. I'm giving you the micro side. My experience, my mortgage has got... I mean, I'll give you my experience. My mortgage has gone up £1,000 a month. Now, I'm lucky in that I can afford to do that. But if I was on an average salary, I would not be able to...
No, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry. If this whole exchange, I'm sorry, Greg, you are so out of touch.
You're a year behind.
You are so out of touch. No, you are out. You are on a different planet.
I'm talking about a week
ago. The experience of people in this country does not bear up to what you're saying. Some sort of revision in past tense.
There's a very important set of
the economy. Well, you tell it to my constituents who contact me, who are looking at leaving their houses because they aren't able to afford their mortgage, because they are now going to food banks because they can't afford to put food on the table for their children. I'm sorry. The Conservative Party from top to bottom has lost touch with people and reality.
Hi, Iain. Just with reference to what you said earlier at the beginning of the programme, in as far as innocent civilians are killed in every war, we're looking at over 3,000 innocent Palestinian children.
Where's that figure come from? Because I certainly have heard no one say that it's 3,000. I think the highest I've heard reported was 2,600. Now, you might say, well, that's not far off 3,000. You'd be right. But let's try and keep the figures to what is being reported.
All right, let's try and keep to figures reported. But why are we only listening to figures from the IDF? Why are we to believe?
Well, these figures are coming from Hamas. Well, because, I mean, fine, if you want to equate a terrorist organisation with the Israeli army, go ahead. I just think that we spend far too much of our time in this debate believing what comes out of the terrorist mouths.
I'm not talking about believing Hamas over the IDF. I'm talking about the desperate pleas from charity organisations and what they have witnessed on the ground, which they are unable to witness on the ground now because all forms of communication have been cut. But Iain, I just want to go back to my original point about innocent civilians being killed in every war. It is disproportionate. And we are talking not about Hamas lives. We're talking about innocent Palestinian civilians. And I think there is a cruelty in the support that not only Rishi Sunak, but now Keir Starmer has given for not wanting a ceasefire. Are we led to believe then that they are saying that only Israeli lives matter?
I don't think they're saying that at all. You're putting words into their mouths. I think what they're saying, and here I'm about to put words into their mouths, but I think what they're saying, or how I interpret it, is that they're saying it's up to Israel to decide when there should be a ceasefire, not up to the British government or the American government or EU governments. Israel has a right to defend itself, and therefore it has to decide whether it will have a ceasefire and whether it can believe Hamas if they then agreed to a ceasefire.
So it's up to Israel, the Israeli state that has broken 28 United National resolutions.
Yes.
So you're actually saying then that our Labour leader and our Conservative Prime Minister would far rather support a state that breaks 28 United National resolutions than innocent Palestinian civilians.
Well, I wouldn't equate it that way. I would say they're they're supporting a democratic Israeli state against a terrorist organisation.
A democratic state that doesn't allow holders. Well, there's no such thing as a Palestinian passport holder because they're denied passports.
Well, there is such thing as a Palestinian passport because I've seen one.
There are no Palestinian passports issued. They're Jordanian. They're any country that will give them refuge because they are refugees.
Well, there are many countries in the world that recognise Palestine as a state, and people in the West Bank, I don't know about Gaza, but Palestinian passports do exist.
Well, let's go back to this other narrative that there are several Palestinians that do not believe in the state of Israel. I believe in a two-state solution, but I believe in the state of Israel that was originally drawn out and now is occupied by illegal Israeli settlers. So if we're going to go on the whole path of revenge, would the Conservative government in power and would Keir Starmer support, as they're supporting the bulldozing of Gaza, would they support the bulldozing of all the Israeli illegal settlements in Israel?
Well, with respect, Dina, you're asking questions to which you perfectly well know the answer. I'm not going to defend Israeli illegal settlements. I've criticised them in the past, and I'm quite happy to criticise them now. But the trouble is, you are approaching this from the point of view that everything Israel does is bad, and you don't have any sense of nuance at all. I've criticised Netanyahu over the years many times. I think he's the worst prime minister for Israel at the moment, and probably always has been in some way. So I can see the arguments that Israel has done wrong in many things, but in the end, you have a choice to make. Do you support a people who have been attacked in the most egregious way only 3 weeks ago? Or do you support an organisation that is holding 229 people hostage? And if surely the question that everybody on your side of the fence has to argue, has to contend with, is if you don't agree with what Israel is doing at the moment, which you clearly don't, I mean, in some ways understandably from where you're coming from, what do you think they should have done? Because no country in the world would have allowed that kind of terror attack to go unchallenged.
Of course it wouldn't, but it starts with speaking with people. How do you think the Irish problem was solved? You don't.
The comparison doesn't work because the IRA had decided that they were never going to win a military war against Britain. So they decided that they would enter peace talks. That's not the situation in Israel. Hamas is dedicated to the full-scale destruction of Israel. And why? I don't understand why you can't see that.
I can see that. I'm not talking from the perspective of Hamas. I think what happened 3 weeks ago was atrocious and barbaric, and I am not condoning it for one moment. For not one moment. I'm speaking about the 2.3 million innocent Palestinians that live in the most condensed prison in the world. That's what I'm talking about, Iain. So you get your facts straight. And by the way, I do not talk only with the nuance of Israel is bad.
Well, you've done a good impression of it in this conversation.
No. What I want to say is it's not a nuance. I think they are bad. They're illegal. It's an illegal operation, what they are doing right now. And yet
Well, it's not an illegal operation, what they're doing right now. It just isn't.
Excuse me, do you think the same thing would happen in this country, that Greater Manchester, all the population of Greater Manchester would be asked to leave their homes and that we would all go willingly to find terrorists?
I'll tell you what I think.
No, I'm asking you to answer this question, Iain. Do you think all the inhabitants of Greater Manchester would agree to leave while we look for underground tunnels of terrorists? And while they leave their homes are bulldozed, their schools are bulldozed, they will have no homes to go back to. Do Do you think the people of Greater Manchester would agree to doing such a thing?
Well, it's a stupid question, isn't it? Because it's never going to happen in this country.
When I ask this question, why is it stupid?
Well, it is
stupid. Think about that narrative and apply
it
to people
in this country. You think about the narrative of 1,500 Israelis being brutally murdered by Hamas and then saying, oh, it's disgraceful that the Israelis are responding in the way that they have, without coming up with a single alternative as to how they could have done, apart from saying, oh, yeah, it's really terrible that we've had all our citizens killed. Yeah, we'll just talk about a two-state solution, will we? I mean, get real, for goodness sake. Kevin in Oxford says, is it not reasonable for a straight person to have issues with homosexuality? No, it isn't. I don't think. Personally, I can't for the life of me understand how two men or women can love each other in an intimate way. Well, so what, is what I would say. I think that shows a degree of intolerance on your part, because clearly a lot of gay people do have this exactly the same kind of loving relationship that straight people have. And Kevin continues, and of course you're not allowed to hold that view because it's frowned upon by modern day woke society. Being a Catholic is frowned upon. Well, if you're speaking as a representative of the Catholic faith, Kevin, I don't think you're doing your faith a lot of good, if I'm honest with you. It's not woke. Being gay is nothing to do with being woke. Being gay is something that is a natural thing, not just for humans, but sort of animal species as well. It's not something that you become. It's something that you are, something that you don't really have a choice in. And if people did have a choice, do you think that most gay people, if they were given the choice of starting their life as straight or gay, their lives would be so much easier if they were straight? Now, I have no regrets about the fact that I'm gay. Would my life have been easier if I'd been straight? Yes, it would. So why, just looking at it logically, would anyone choose to be homosexual? So someone basically ripped up your letter and wrote a different one, presumably with your signature on the bottom.
I think what they did was they crossed out the name, Michael Grade, and wrote the name Stephen Gilbert in on my advice note.
And who do you think did that?
I'm never going to say because...
do you know?
Yeah.
Why won't you say?
I do know. Yeah, I do know.
Why won't you say?
Well, I believe that it was Dougie Smith.